Commence primary ignition.
Welcome to Unlimited Power. My name is D-Rod, and today I have a guest joining us, Dave, and we're going to be talking about Twilight of the Republic leaders and ranking them as far as it goes as their draftability. Dave is joining me. Dave's played several games in his career of tabletop. He plays a lot of limited. I've seen Dave play many sealed events for pre-releases, and at large events, he's quick to jump into draft pods. Dave, go ahead and say hi, introduce yourself, and some of the games that you've played in the past.
Hello, Unlimited Power family. My name's Dave. I met D-Rod about, 8 months ago when you were first doing. D-Rod was kind enough to be hosting the the preview weekends for Star Wars Unlimited, where we got to play with our, smaller Darth Vader and Luke decks. I got a targeted ad back in February saying, hey, look, there's a new Star Wars card game coming out. Hadn't heard anything about it up until that point, and basically had been needing an itch to fill a card game. I've been a Magic player since 1999. My first set that I opened cards from was Invasion, and recently I kind of fell out a little bit with Magic. I worked at a card shop for a while and kind of lost that love for Magic, and now I feel like I've gotten too far behind, but I'm glad to have found a game that had just started up and can be in the ground level at. So overall, I'm mainly a limited player. In terms of constructed tournaments, I've played probably less than 50 total in my whole career. But in terms of limited, I loved it. I played a lot of the big Pro Tour qualifiers, Grand Prix, and stuff like that. I made day 2 at GP Vegas, the first one, which is probably my biggest accomplishment, but which is not great in the big scheme of things. But, it felt like a lot. I was pretty much a struggling limited player up until about college, and then for some reason stuff started clicking. And since then, I've basically been in love with it.
Yeah, and limited is a skill. Limited is not my favorite, at least in drafting limited, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about like how we rated these leaders. But yeah, seeing you at do these a lot of events, and you and I have talked about like some of my pre-release guides. If some stuff just doesn't make a lot of sense, and so it's like I know you have a very limited focus. And we're using limited in the sense of obviously
The format.
The type of format play, not limited in the sense of thinking. And so you're really good at seeing those what clicks, what works, what doesn't. And one thing I've noticed in my career of working in the industry, playing in the industry, is there are a lot of people that are really good in limited because of just they've done so much of it, and it's very clear to see why cards are good. I used to joke around all the time about how I had a boss who's played Magic since the start, and he would never play constructed Magic, but he could never lose a limited event. He would go to the big events and he'd do great. If it was a sealed or a local draft, he always walked away in first place, just because there are just some people that can think that way, see all the lineups, and don't even need to understand the set that well. They just know what good cards are and how to build. And when they just know the limited format. And I think you have a lot of those same strengths. And that's why I'm kind of excited to sit down and talk about more of this, especially as now we're in the third set. Everyone's already noticing there's a huge overage of Twilight of the Republic out there. For good and bad, that just means there are a lot more options for draft, and you're going to see a lot more stores offering draft as an option, as a way to help them not only go through product, but to bring more people into the game. And, so I think it's really important for us to be talking about that now in this set, where the first 2 sets were obviously harder. Like, I don't think I saw more than 2 to 3 events in Portland for draft and for the first set of Spark. So, did you happen to catch any, Dave?
I think I did 2 of them. I think Guardian Games was doing like 1 a month. So I caught the first one. Set 1 was a lot of dominated by green. Unfortunately, the boogeyman of that set was Overwhelming Barrage at the uncommon slot. And it was so good that if you were playing villainy, if you're playing green, there's no reason not to be kind of even just splashing it at 7, because it could straight up win you the game. So I got a couple of those in. Definitely got a lot more in of Shadows. I got to go up to PAX West for the event, and basically instead of doing any of the constructed events, I spent the whole weekend playing limited. I think I got 12 drafts in.
Ooh.
Got a pretty good understanding of the format. At least I felt like it. Though this format does feel a little bit less punishing, unless of course you're playing against possibly the best leader in the format. But we'll get to him or get to them eventually.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how we decided to take a look at this. Now, I love limited sealed. You enjoy limited draft, and of course, I'm always looking at stuff with construction, as that's like majority of what we're doing on the stream is streaming decks, and going through that. So it was definitely took me a little bit on how to look at a leader and some stuff I consider. And I'm not going to go through completely in the scoring process, but I at least want to like talk about the three things I looked at when looking at a leader. Um, the first thing I looked at them as the card itself, just their abilities, the leader ability and the unit abilities. And I really wanted to decide, you know, if the look at it saying, is the deployability good when they're a unit? Is the leader ability good when they're just in the leadership zone? Can I use it every turn? Do I need to like have the right colors? Do I need to does this one have to have specific cards that only work with it that I need to know to look at? A lot of different factors there. But essentially I'm looking at the leader card in general. Is it good or does it need a lot of support? And based on how much support it needs is how I'm going to kind of rank it as a general card in this format. The second thing I look at is piloting as a deck. There are some leaders that are really good, but I think you need to have a certain level of skill in order to pilot it. And other leaders that are also good, they require very little skill, which is good for someone going into their first couple of drafts. And then the third thing I'm looking at is just how much knowledge or skill do you need to have when you're actually doing the draft component of this game, right? Because when you're drafting, you're playing a couple of different games. You're playing the regular game. You have to know how to deck build, but you really need to know when you need to take certain cards, what cards to leave. And what cards you really just need to like skip out on. And I think there are some leaders that really make you consider what you're drafting and how you need to really avoid certain cards or specifically look for certain cards. So again, three big things I'm looking at here. I won't get into the details of them too much, but the cards' abilities and how much support they need, the skill it needs as a player to play that leader in the deck, and then the skill it needs to draft it. Dave, what about you? When you were thinking about this, and we're going to compare our notes here for each leader soon, what were some key things you looked at when you were looking at draftable leaders?
Well, yeah, definitely kind of looking at kind of the resources used when using your leader ability. Obviously, most of the best leaders tend to have free abilities or abilities that just require it to use like an action or get you kind of the attack with the action or get you kind of two actions with one.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a key thing. Also, the flip turn really matters. The flip turn is generally your most powerful turn in kind of in this game, just in
In
general.
this
So
game, yeah.
yeah, and being able to have kind of a free unit on that turn and how it kind of matches up into some of the more common units definitely matters too, at least in my kind of evaluation overall. Um, but what I'd say is like a lot of the things that you're looking for matter too. One thing I will say is uh, sometimes when I am doing kind of the draft, I kind of end up in a leader. I try to stay very open during the drafting process. So by that, or at least leader drafting. So that means I try to take at least one villainy and one heroism unit or one that, and so that way, if I do need to kind of backdoor into a color that I or into the other aspect versus heroism versus villainy, I'll have at least one option. But
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
and then also, something to also think about too is like how your leader sometimes fits into your curve. Sometimes, you might just need a big beater at the end of your curve. So sometimes these less powerful leaders might kind of fit the bill for what you need as in terms of to close out the game. So,
Yeah.
and while
Uh,
synergy is definitely a thing you want to think about, power is generally something I consider first over synergy. when going from a limited perspective. So
yeah, and you said four things I want to touch on real quick before we jump into the first card. One, I really want us to get back to this, and we'll do this soon for people who are watching, talking about like things to consider when you're drafting in general, because you made a good point there with the things to look at, and that's kind of what I wanted to also bring up, because some terms people are going to be hearing in this video that they may be unfamiliar with. First one would be like, we're going to talk about curve, right? So talk about cards that come out based on the resources that we should have in play for putting them out. Are we playing within tempo? Are we being consistent? We talked about synergy, which are going to be cards that are clearly work well with the leaders because they're sharing the same keywords or the same tactics essentially that the leader needs. And then there was one more I forgot. You mentioned synergy, we mentioned curve, we mentioned it wasn't
and that
power.
being open, drafting open, maybe.
No, there
Or
were man, there was one more. Oh well, I forgot it. But those were two at least I wanted to bring up. If I hear the term again, we'll give the definition. But I didn't want people to miss out or on kind of what those terms are if they're new to card games. Which I know when I hear it, that's what I'm looking for is curve. So
yeah, and someone who's been playing for 20 years probably doesn't think about it as much. So yeah, definitely share.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's look at our first leader and unit here. It is going to be the classic meme, "Hello there," with Obi-Wan Kenobi. So as a leader unit, we'll look at this left to right. We have a 6 cost, meaning he deploys when you have 6 or more resources. So you can do this as early as turn 5 if you're putting one down every turn. He's a 4/7 with Sentinel, and it has an on attack ability. So this will trigger whenever he declares an attack. He'll heal 1 damage from a unit, and if you do choose to do this, you have to deal 1 damage to a different unit, which it doesn't say, that has to be an enemy unit. So this means you could hit one of your guys. And as a leader, Obi-Wan just has an ability that says you can use an action to exhaust him, heal 1 damage from a unit. He doesn't shoot this damage anywhere, and he can only do it once per turn. So Dave, you're the guest. Why don't you start us off and talk to me about your thoughts here and where you would rank Obi-Wan, and we'll see. We'll go from there.
So overall, I think Obi-Wan seems to be pretty well positioned in the format in general. Being a 4/7 on turn 6 is a pretty beefy unit, and also having Sentinel definitely helps. The heal 1 a turn can be good. What ends up happening in limited, it generally becomes a board control game. So if you can kind of heal 1 off your unit and continue to value trade, that can provide you a lot of kind of board control and allow you to kind of close out games that allows you to kind of close out your opponent because you're always kind of value trading up. That being said, having like 4 attack, granted he attacks for 5 if you have any kind of damaged unit on the board, so that puts him in like a pretty good spot overall. I will say though, like 6 seems to be like a big barrier on the ground, and that seems to be like the number of like the big units that seem to be and I kept on running into that 4/6 Sentinel today. He was actually who I drafted today in today's draft, and he felt pretty good. Honestly, he has like, I don't want to say a bad matchup because it doesn't seem like anyone has a very good matchup into Anakin. Anakin, if you have any damage on the base, like can sometimes just one shot Obi-Wan, and that does not feel great. But overall, I find he's been pretty strong. I've lost to him a couple times, and the times I've drafted him, he's felt pretty good. How about you, D-Rod? What's been your take on Mr. Obi-Wan himself? Or Space Jesus?
Space Jesus, yeah. It's my favorite time of year as we approach the holidays, and I just see all the pictures of Obi-Wan and young Obi-Wan and think, how can I convince my mother that this is Jesus Christ, and put that somewhere in a decoration around the holiday season. So I usually try to figure that out, and I'll put that there. But Obi-Wan as a leader within this game, as someone I was excited about in limited, it's one of those where I rank him lower than you, and only because I feel like he needs a lot of blue to really make some stuff work. I think having Sentinel is good. Being able to heal your Sentinel is going to buy you your time. I think when he's out, he deploys, but he kind of makes you play the slow game. With blue white, a lot of your early drops are pretty low cost, so you're kind of better like trying to go with like the Republic officials, keeping Sentinel. Having when they have Sentinel and healing them, buying yourself some time. He's complemented more with green, which has some Sentinels. But he's not as complimented with like other colors, so I think that's why I put him a little bit lower, is because he doesn't give you a lot of options there. I think to play Obi-Wan, you need to be a little bit of experienced with it. You want to know what you're healing and making sure you're setting yourself up correctly for the Obi-Wan turn. Because I think that's the hard part is if your opponent's going really wide, you're worried about that Obi-Wan who may kill a few guys but be taken out. We've talked about there's few cards that can one-shot him, but they do exist in this set. And they're going to be some bombs, but you don't really want to throw them out there when your opponent just sitting with like 3 uncommons that after 2 hits, he's dead and you get 1 4-hit attack. So I think you got to really build the support around him, and blue gives you those options. We were talking a little bit before this about how I did a little bit of math, and I think where Obi-Wan, if you really want to make Obi-Wan work, you want to have a lot of Sentinel, but even in white blue, there's only like 4 commons and uncommons that are going to have Sentinel, 3 that can give you Sentinel, and there's only about a couple of cards for you to heal, and there's only 4 cards that really benefit from healing. That's probably the other thing about Obi-Wan is healing is great, but are there any cards that give you value with it? And I think there's only 4 that'll least allow you to either do more damage because you're constantly healing, or give you like restore abilities, right, with your healing. So I think he's just slow. I think to draft him, you need to be a little bit more of an advanced player because you need to know what you're looking for, not just blue white cards, but like strong synergy. Or you may get, because you could easily go from like a very meh deck and maybe get like 1 game out of 3 wins, but I think you can turn this into a 3-0 with a bunch of commons and uncommons. That's kind of my opinion. A little bit long, but yeah, that's kind of where I land on him.
Yeah, and another thing I'll say, I know you said green is probably a good pairing for him, but today I was actually running yellow, and something that actually ends up being pretty good is yellow has the most kind of common, uncommon ambush units at this point, and being able to kind of ambush in, heal, stuff like that. Well, not amazing. It didn't necessarily always change the numbers, but when it does change the numbers, doing that extra 1 point of damage in limited can be difficult at times to clear off a unit.
Yeah, and I think throughout this set, especially these leaders, maybe in the limited format, I think ambush is a great thing, obviously in limited, because it can be that extra kill event you need in your colors. When I think of like hidden sharpshooter in yellow, a 4/3 seems great, and if they can survive, even awesome if you heal them. I think it's just one of those things. When I see it, it's always like, if I have to find those cards to make something even better, then I'm just like, okay, how strong does that make the leader? They're always going to be good, but there's some leaders, and it's not necessarily Obi-Wan, but there's some we'll talk about later. I'm like, you actually need to have this card to make it worth your time,
Yeah. And what I'll just say is like a caveat, ambush is definitely something you want to be targeting whenever you're in kind of a limited format in this. Being able to kind of change the board state immediately without your opponent kind of being able to kind of account for it is really powerful. So
yeah, definitely surprised. Let's get in the ranking here, because we were talking about Obi-Wan for a bit. So for me, when I'm looking at him, I think he's I would immediately kind of put him in a D ranking here, but I'm willing to kind of hear some arguments of higher, because I do think he's easy to pilot. I think that you can easily bring him into like a little bit more of a C tier, but I do think you need some knowledge when drafting with him. Easy to play with, but you really want to make sure you're getting the right cards to complement him. So I think overall, as a card, I put him as a D. But I think because he's easy to play, I'd put him into a C slot. And I think this is going to be our first card is where we're going to disagree, and we'll kind of put him somewhere. But where do you think he should be?
Yeah, that's kind of funny too, because like Obi-Wan's been like one of the leaders I've had like the most trouble with in general, it seems like. Granted, I played a lot of best of ones at one point, so you can't really learn a whole lot. Sometimes you just lose the best one. So originally I had him, hovering around like the bottom of A tier, but
Hmm.
I'm willing to, kind of compromise and say like he's probably closer to B than he is to A.
And I'm willing to compromise and say he could be closer to B than C, even though I start him off as a D. When I really think about it, I'm like, I think a lot of people can go in with Obi-Wan, can see how he works, have a good time, and even if they're not getting all the right cards, even if they get a few, especially early on before he deploys, I think that could really set someone up for success.
Yeah.
Um, and
And he works pretty good with big units too. So if you end up, making it to the late game, you're in a pretty good spot.
yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, that's too bad. Let's take a look at our next one here. I think we're both going to agree on what we think about Miss Nala Se. So, Nala Se is like one of the only showcase cards I got, actually, the only showcase card I got in this set. As a leader, she deploys when you have 4 or more resources. So, this means she can come out as early as turn 3. She's a 1/7, so she's not going to be doing much damage. And her ability is that you can ignore the aspect penalty on clone units you play. This means you just don't pay that additional 2. And each friendly clone unit gains, when they're defeated, heal 2 damage from your base. Now, when Nala Se is not a unit in play, her leader ability is what we call static. It's just ongoing and just says ignore the penalty on clone units you play. So, first off, like I love Nala Se as a constructed unit, and even in limited, it's not horrible, but it's such a like red herring. It's such a like a card that just wants to throw me off, because I think like anyone can play a Nala Se deck as long, it's just like it's just playing whatever you want. But if you're not really drafting well to set up for your tempo or to get real good synergy, then you're not going to get a lot of value out of her. And we were talking about this even before. There aren't any like high value clones that really do much for her. So you're really just playing more of a blue black build and trying to make sure you're finding the right units in the curve slots of cost 2, 3, 4, 5. And you kind of have to come up with your strategy as you go with your card. So I think in limited, I think this card is harder to build around, even though you have more options, because you really have to know what are the best options and why they're the best options. And it'd be one of the cards. If I had 2 blue black leaders, I'm probably not picking Nala Se unless I just don't have the support necessary at all for the other one and have to play the other colors. But yeah, that's kind of my opinion there. I think as a card in limited, I'd give her very low. I think anyone can play her. Like a beginner could play with Nala Se and get an idea of the game. But drafting, I think you do need to be a bit experienced, a bit advanced. Like you need to put some games under your belt before you tackle Nala Se. What about you, Dave?
Yeah. So one of the first things I kind of look at is like the stats of the leader on the flip turn. And while Nala Se has a big butt overall, and by butt we mean she has a lot of toughness, um, she has
A
one.
lot of health.
Yeah, health. There we
Health.
go. Health. That's the name of it in this game.
Mhm.
She has a lot of health, but that one power is or one attack is really problematic. It's unfortunately isn't able to basically trade with anything on the ground besides what do you call it? The droid tokens.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the Sentinel droid.
Yeah. And even then I mean, it is what it is, but and like the other problem that you kind of brought up is like the cards that you get to play by ignoring the aspect penalty on clones. In this, I think they're all commons and uncommons
Mhm.
in this set. So you're not really getting any of the power payoffs that you would be getting in constructed, where you have access to like Wrecker or other kind of high end was it Bad Batch kind of cards.
Yeah, your strongest rarity of cards are Clone Commander Cody's a rare and Clone is a legendary, but both are green.
Cody's an uncommon.
Cody's uncommon. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Cody is uncommon.
Yeah.
So you haven't their highest one, I guess, is just going to be you could play Rex. No, Rex. Yeah, there's a Rex.
Rex is a starter card.
Oh, that's a starter card. Yeah. So no, yeah, you're just stuck with Clone, which is a legendary and green.
Yeah. Or a bunch of common and uncommon 3/3s.
Yeah.
the 3 force. So I think just in general, she's not really giving you a whole lot on the flip turn, and then she's not really giving you a whole lot as a leader ability. So she's almost kind of blank on both sides, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, like
Granted,
I'm not swinging with her.
yeah, and I don't even know if this would be a card that you would flip on turn 4 unless you were losing a lot of health, because it's not going to help you fight for the board or keep
Mm-mm.
control of the board, and it's not going to do anything if you don't have clones in play or aren't missing health.
If I was sitting with a bunch of hidden sharpshooters in my turn, then maybe I'd do that. If I was just
Yeah.
sharpshooter for the next 3 turns, I'd put her out early. All right, yeah. Well, ranking her, immediately my rank is a D. She's easy to play, which may put her in a C, but I think you really have to know what you're drafting, which is why I'm really floating between these two, but more of a D ranking for Nalase. What about you?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with a D. I don't think she quite makes it to F tier in terms of like you don't ever want to play her, but I think it's tough for me to think of a time where I'd be like, oh, I want to draft Nalase versus other leaders at this point. Whereas, like, I don't know if I would ever be like, oh, this is going to be the draft where I get all these clones.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah, but now let's say I'm looking at a lot of factors to make her work, and even to get the value out of her, you don't deploy her early. You wait till you have 2 or 3 clones that you plan on dying or have ambush. So I think the setup takes a while. She's easy to play, just to get a grasp of the game, and you can have some fun, but you may not win. So yeah, I think we're both set on a D. Yeah, blue leaders. I think we're going to agree here. Blue does not feel like the strongest in constructed compared to some colors.
Mhm.
Um, Especially because as we go into this next character, Nute Gunray. So, I'll let you start off with introducing a Nute Gunray here. Or at least talking about him. But yeah, he's a 6 cost leader, so he deploys when you have 5 resources. 2/8 on attack creates battle droid tokens. It's like you see it, and it's like this is kind of good, but not for that cost. And as a leader, though, it gets worse. You have to exhaust him, use an action, and you can only do this if 2 or more friendly units were defeated to get you 1 battle droid token. So at most, you're losing 2/1/1s to get a 1/1. Or at the least, at the easiest, right? Um, and there's stuff in here that works with the set, but that's just what Nute Gunray does. Give me your thoughts about him in a draft format.
So I think Nute Gunray seems like he should have all the tools to be like doing what you want to be doing in like a blue black exploit deck, like being able to have kind of a steady stream of battle droids sounds good and all like that. In practice, at least what I've found, even with like multiple of the create 2 droids tactic and stuff like that, I was still having a lot of trouble consistently getting uh Nute's leader action to ever kind of go off, and so that makes it tough. Also, just like kind of putting a 1/1 into play is a lot of times just fodder for your opponent's things. So if you don't have the initiative, they can just clear it before you get to use it, which has been problematic. And then as a 6 cost leader, the turn he comes down, he's like competing with a lot of very powerful leaders, and him being a 2/8 doesn't really clear anything at that point in the game. And if it does, like he's only lasting 1 or 2 attacks, anyways. It seems like so. He's definitely falls under pretty weak to me. Uh, though that being said, like I feel like there are worse leaders to play if you're in villainy, villainy vigilance. So
Yeah, I don't know if for me, I put him in the worst of villainy vigilance as far as limited, but I think it's because of some of the things you said. It comes on the board, and what does he do? Like, it's just there's nothing significant here. You're not going to get value out of the turn. It's not like Nute hits the board and immediately you're just like the game has shifted in your favor. He doesn't get you ahead. He doesn't even tie you up with your opponent. You're just left with a 2/8 on turn 5 who can give you a battle droid token after he attacks. The droid token just can open up more opportunities for your opponent, it feels like, in this format. Um, and it just feels like the only way you're going to get real value out of him is with exploit mechanics. right? I mean, you're just that's it, and trying to create an engine. So, in my head, he already is low ranked because as a leader, neither of his abilities are that good. Without a lot of support, you usually going to want to stay within blue and green because they are the only ones that have the most droid creation. Most of it being green, so you're kind of forced to play certain colors, and you still need good bombs to get value by getting that exploit mechanic going. So, for me, he's definitely lower tier. Drafting wise, you have to draft the right cards of the right colors, I feel like, to get value out of him. Play wise, a newer player. Like if this is your first time drafting, I would say it's first time drafting cards. He's good. Like you could figure it out, but if this was your um first time ever just drafting, not your first time drafting Star Wars Unlimited, your first time drafting period, I wouldn't pick him. Like I'd tell no beginner to play him. But if you've at least played Star Wars a bit, Nute works. Um, that's my general opinion there. So let's talk about ranking him. Like I'm dancing between a D and an F
Oh,
with Nute
geez.
myself. I mean, you've had a little bit more limited experience with him. It's just looking at him, looking at these things. It's just he's not up there for me without a lot of work. And if I have all the right blue black cards, yeah, I'll go with it. But there's nothing that's going to force me to decide. Yeah, I'm going to play Nute, which he was like my most excited unit.
Yeah, it's funny because like what do you call it? The pre-release where I did end up playing like Nute Gunray, I felt like I had all like the cards I needed. I had like gore, I had multiple unit producers, the what is it, the Trade Federation guy that makes the separatist guy when it dies, and
Yep,
just like I had
wartime
multiple of
official.
that. Yeah, I had all these things and I felt like I had all the points to it, and then still on turn 6 I never felt like I was ahead going into that turn. Or even
No.
going into that turn.
Yeah.
And that was a really bad place to be. Um, what I'll say is I definitely think he's better than Nalase, but I had him at like the end of tier C. So like a little bit above Nalase, but not much.
It's hard because like I'm willing to put them both on D. My argument being like, now let's say at least you can play other colors if you need to. Where Nute, I just feel like if you're it
Yeah.
just feels like blue green's going to be the colors you really want to draft. Like it just feels like
Yeah.
those are the cards you need to look at.
I mean,
And if you're
technically you
not
could
looking at
play
that,
yellow. There's like a couple of producers in yellow, but they're not very excited. It's more of green is the real payoff in terms of making guys.
yeah, especially with the exploit. Like if you're going to need to defeat 2 units, you're going to want to exploit. Yes, yellow has some good dark side exploit cards, but some of the better ones are with green, where you look at like the one that has ambush, obviously gore, um, the stuff like that. So I'd put him in a D. I'd raise him up to
Yeah.
a D.
And probably your opponent's never going to give you 2 droids if you political pressure them in your Nute Gunray, right?
No, that's the thing. You're setting it's all readable. And I think that's the thing I look at some of these leaders on. It's like you're literally telegraphing your next move to your opponent. And if you need that much setup, there's good setup and there's bad setup, but a setup like this where it's like 2/1/1s, I'll probably have an answer to 2/1/1s. Not saying people won't get an exploit off of you, but
Yeah. Well, I was mainly
answers are
saying
better.
at least lets you start off your train of making droids if you can put 2 into play.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I'm willing to agree that Newt is probably D. I would put him above Nalase, but I'm willing to be wrong about that too.
We'll do that. We'll move them there a little bit on the way out. All right. Yoda. Let's take a Yoda here, a little guy. 7 cost, so one of the higher ones we've seen as far as leader units. Not necessarily high in the game itself, but in the set. 4/9. So Yoda comes out when you have on 6 turns, when you have 7 or more resources, earliest 6 turn. Has Restore 2. Okay. A 4/9 Restore 2. We've seen a lot of blue leaders. Obviously, if it was going to be Restore 3, they'd probably drop us down to like 2 damage. So I'm okay with the 4/9 because most blue leaders just don't either have this much health or don't have Restore. Like, I'll take it. When deployed, you may discard a card from your deck. Um, If you do, defeat an enemy non-leader unit that costs the same as or less than a discarded card. Now, this is going to be the top card from your deck, which is not clear, but it's the top card. So you have a ability of killing someone, and you can set this up a little bit because Yoda gives you the ability to exhaust him as an action on his leader side. And if a unit left played this phase, draw a card, then put a card from your hand on the top or bottom of your deck. So you can set this up the turn he deploys to kill something that you know is out there, or just put the biggest card in your hand on top and try to keep it there, and use Yoda for a kill event. Now, Yoda for me, I think as a card, because there's a little bit of setup here, you do need to have a unit leave play, whether yours or your opponent's. He immediately becomes a card to me that is, either of these abilities are good, like they're both good, but they're both situational. So it's one of those things of like, some leaders have both the abilities are good, they're using every turn, but for me it's just like, well, you need this to trigger to get this going. If you get the engine going, awesome. But I think it does require a little bit of work to make Yoda a solid piece. I think to play Yoda, a entry, or not a beginning player, but like a novice player. So again, if this is your first time playing Star Wars Unlimited, as your first trading card game, I think go for it. Try him out. Like, you should be able to pilot a Yoda deck pretty well. Drafting, though, I think drafting is easy because you don't have to look for key cards for him at all. Like, as long as you're getting good cards and cards within his color, you'll be fine. You don't need specific cards to make it work as much as you need just to make sure you're killing a unit every turn. So overall, my notes in here, like, he was going to survive around 3 hits for the majority of the set, pending some big legendaries out there. So I think that's good. He'll get you about 4 to 6 health back on your base with that restore ability. And really just the limitations is the setup that you need, but I think you can get there. So overall, I think Yoda's a good leader, just not great. What do you think?
Yeah, so Yoda's actually one of the few leaders I haven't gotten to play against so far. That being said, like from a just like an evaluation perspective, one of the things that you always look at in limited is generally, when you rate cards is or when you're drafting cards, you look for like kind of bombs, removal, kind of dudes, and then like tricks, like kind of later, or enhancements and tricks kind of later on. Now, Yoda is unique in that he's basically a removal spell on your leader unit on the turn. Granted, it requires some kind of setup, but kind of having that ability should be strong overall. My kind of question overall is like, is turn 7 too late currently? Some of the strongest leaders all deploy on 5 and 6, it seems like. So is Yoda just going to be too late with its coming in? I've yet to see that, but 9 toughness on the turn 7 is no joke to deal with. I mean, while Count Dooku hasn't been like the most powerful of leaders with his abilities, him being a 5/9 with overwhelm has been very relevant. So I think Yoda's probably pretty good overall. Another thing to think about is like when we're kind of evaluating these blue leaders, blue tends to have, or has seemed to have, the best removal in the set. At common, it has both perilous position and vanquish, so that kind of gives you a little bit more controlling aspects. So I definitely feel like blue is kind of leaning towards a more slower play style. So if you can kind of stall out the early to mid game, then you probably have a chance kind of closing it out.
Yeah, I agree.
But 4 attack is not a lot on turn 7. That's one thing. Like, he doesn't trade very well in terms of like killing other people's units. Like, he's good at killing a lot of small units, and that's kind of what you probably want to be doing with like a restore too, and hopefully taking out their big unit with his flip. So I think he's pretty good. I don't know if he'd be better than Obi-Wan, just kind of in terms of like the setup needed to it, but I definitely see how you're saying like you can just play good stuff with Yoda and not have to worry about kind of synergy necessarily, because his ability isn't based off of synerginess. So
Yeah. With Yoda, you don't have to feel like you're getting the right cards and healing. Like, if you have the best cards, great. It'll make it work. And And like Obi-Wan with that Sentinel, I'm always worried about, like, that just makes him a target. Like, doesn't matter how many other Sentinel units I have, they can hit Obi-Wan. So is there anyone worth Obi-Wan protecting? Where Yoda is, oh, I want more value out of that healing. I can just throw out whatever Sentinel unit I want and buy me the time I need. Because you're right, it doesn't feel like he's doing a lot, but if I'm playing the game slowly, not slow playing, but essentially if I'm just making it to where like my goal is to get to 7 and then just build, like, have a wall and slowly get my
And
health back,
start
then
and stop
yeah.
dropping like 7 and 8 drops versus my opponent, and be like, okay, deal with these kind of things while I'm restoring.
Especially if you did everything right, and by the time you get to turn 2, you're killing a unit every turn, then you're in a good spot, right? Like if they're especially only getting one out, but even in blue white, or just in blue in general, but definitely blue white, you're really stuck with playing like one card a turn until you get to about 6 resources.
And he also has like an action you can use for free if you're trying to manipulate initiative and stuff like that, or manipulate actions, which is nice.
All right. Well, for me, as a card itself, I put him like at a C. When I consider like how easy it is to play, when I think about how you don't have to think too much about drafting, like I feel like um someone new to Star Wars Unlimited as a TCG could play Yoda very simple. I think if someone wanted to learn how to draft, they could draft with Yoda really well. So I'd put Yoda in the B slot. Not the A slot, but definitely he could go into the B, but I would not put him below a C level as far as the leader goes.
Yeah, that's where I had Yoda kind of live into, kind of right in the middle of B. Though I did have Obi-Wan a little bit higher, but it makes sense for him to kind of be first in terms of that. So I definitely agree there.
All right. Let's look at Wat and get your opinion on him here in just a minute. So Wat is a 5-cost leader unit, which means he comes out as early as turn 4. 3/6. So complete split there. Separatist official, green black. On attack, you can give if a friendly unit was defeated this phase, you may give another unit +2/+2 for the phase. As a leader, has a similar ability. As an action, you can exhaust him, and if a friendly unit was defeated, give another unit +2/+2 for the phase. So we kind of saw this a little bit with Nute Gunray. If you really want to, you're going to want to kill a unit to get some type of buff, or whether you're killing it to exploit or using other mechanics there. But he's an interesting leader. Walk me through some of your initial thoughts about him.
Yeah, so I did have I got lucky enough to use him in one of my sealed pools one of the times. He felt pretty good overall. The ability is pretty strong. Board control is obviously important in a tempo based game like this, where you can do a direct attacking. Being able to choose where you attack means that you can choose how kind of things trade, and by being able to pump your unit allows you to trade up. Another kind of interesting thing it allows you to do is, if you do pump your unit and it survives, even if it has like lethal damage on it, you can still kind of exploit it before the turn's over. So it kind of gives you a lot more kind of flexibility. Obviously, on the turn 5, his flip turn, you're looking to do kind of doubling up on the action plus the on attack. Um, that's a little bit harder than it seems, because you have to have like a lot of units in play to do it, and he can't kind of pump himself. But on the kind of turns it does work, getting an extra 4 damage on that turn, or kind of trading up and killing their 5 drop, can feel pretty good too. Um, one thing is, like, he's a little bit small at 3/6. I think that's because he has kind of such a powerful pumping ability overall. So he gets outclassed pretty quickly on the ground. So like he gets stonewalled by a lot of sentinel units very quick, and then doesn't necessarily have a good trade when they attack into him. So I definitely think he is the most powerful of the green black leaders, though, but he is the rare leader, so you're not going to be seeing him as much in general.
Whoa, that's big talk. That's big talk. Wat Tambor, Techno Union foreman over Dooku is like, a count. That's wild. No, those are a lot of good points. Any other comments for him?
And I mean, like, obviously, the things that you're trying to get to is like getting 2 units out on the board at any point in time. You need to have 2 in play. Unfortunately, if you play something afterwards, like it's going to be exhausted, so you're not going to have the ability to kind of make use of the ability. So that is something that's a little bit interesting with it. But overall, I was pretty impressed with it. It got me to a 3.0 at the pre-release that I was in, so I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah, I like Wat in concept. It does need the setup, and the setup and the cards are there. I think when we know we have to get droids out because it's going to be the easiest. They're literally cards that will create 2 to 3 droids when you play them, or cards that will die. In his color, we're given the spaceship that'll give us a droid. A couple other ships that will literally just knock out droids left and right, and there'll be some stuff in the colors. When I look at Wat, though I do as I scroll accidentally there to Dooku, we'll talk about next. Pull up that Wat note. There we go. When I look at Wat, like because he needs the setup, because you're telegraphing a bit, like there isn't much you can do here to get much surprise. Like the best surprise you're going to get is if you ambush somebody in, kill somebody, like let's say with a Coruscant guard, hit something with that 3/2 unit, it dies, give a +2/+2 to another unit on board. You're telling your opponent this is who's going to swing, right? If they have another unit, they may not want to take that additional 2, and they'll do the trade, which is fine, right? You force them into the trade unless they have a kill event or anything like that. But I do hate telegraphing stuff. But in a limited format, you and I both know telegraphing doesn't mean a whole lot as it does in constructed, because their options of dealing with it are going to be limited. So it's the part where I can see some games going in their favor, but then there's other parts where I'm just like, that's the problem. Like there is no surprise here with Wat Tambor. It's just like, I'll just kill this guy. So that's probably my only thing really about him. You do want to find certain cards to get more value out. You want to find the cards with token generation. If you're not seeing a lot of that, or if someone else is drafting token generation, I think that's where you're going to struggle with Wat. So I can see it kind of go downhill depending on your drafting level. So for me, when I think about him, I think he requires a advanced knowledge of play. Like you really need to know how to which units you need to kill, which unit you need to ambush in, ambush into to really get the value, and are you playing the cards right? And I also think you need to know how to draft well. Someone who just like, I have a bunch of green black cards, I'll play Wat. I think it's more of, I'm wanting to play Wat, I better draft the right green black cards. Like that's how kind of I see him. I think I like him more in constructed than the limited, and I kind of wish I would have played him a little bit more or at all in sealed. But I think there's a lot of cards that do work well with him. So let's just go to the grading here and let you start off. Where would you put Mr. Tambor, foreman of the Techno?
Well, it seems like I've been a little bit like hotter on some of the leaders overall. So I had him sitting up in A tier with Obi-Wan.
A tier, okay.
But that was, I mean, he's you don't see him very often. That's like the one thing. So it's like my one experience with him was pretty good. I've seen a couple decks that work pretty good, but there's not a whole ton of data yet, it seems like.
And it's definitely one of those things, like when you see him, that's kind of the question, is like, why don't we see them? Do we not see him because you have to draft well? Do we not see him because people are intimidated by it? I don't know. For me, I would say it's just one. You either have the parts or you don't. That's what I feel like, and so for me, that's why I would definitely argue like C is probably where I put him. I could compromise on B, but could you compromise on A and B?
I'm willing to put him at like the top of B for now, and then maybe reorganize if A tier is a little sparse in the future, because I don't want to. I want some people to end up in A, and 2 of my A's have already been shot.
Yeah, no, and and we started off on how we said this, of like, your experience with draft is a lot more than my experience with draft in every game period, because draft is not my format, and I think that's why I like doing this. It's like we're having a tiered discussion, really, and people are going to have their own opinions on cards and what's high and what's not, and there are people are going to have their own experiences, and that's probably what we should have said in the beginning of it. But these are our opinions, and this is us usually just like we're just having a conversation as we would at a regular Monday night or Sunday event where we're hanging out there, like, where would we put this? It doesn't mean that Wat Tambor is a B leader. Could be he is an A leader. Could be he's an F leader overall. But in my opinions, this is kind of where we put him based off our experience and knowledge. Doesn't mean that's really where they are. Could be, but not definitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of already said, like, I think it's one of those. I think you just have to have enough stuff working for you to make it work. And when I'm looking at a B leader, he doesn't necessarily need a bomb, but I do feel like he needs a lot of support in his color to make it work.
That might be fair too, as like a thing where it's like I had all the support in this sealed pool that was magnificent. It felt incredible, and maybe that's why it felt stronger than it was. I was going droid deployment into like the troop transport turn 3 or turn 2. And it was just like it felt really good when I was doing that with Wat Tambor.
Well, yeah.
So
of course it does. Or again, like if you can kill 2 units, put in the green uncommon with exploit and ambush. Guess what target's going to see that +2? Well, it already has the ambush, but you know what I mean. Some type of value. Like there's stuff there.
And then also once you get control of the board, it comes into like a situation where it's like you can trade your small unit in and then get the good trades up. And if like they don't have anything on board, then you're dictating the kind of the whole trade. So
yeah. I just know you want 2 units on board, 1 you're okay dying, or at least having 1 unit on board and something in your hand. So it's always like you need 2 of something to get value. That's my condition. If leader requires me to have more stuff than I may actually have, then that's where I'm just like, well, is there value here? I don't know. And we'll see that in some other leaders,
Yeah, and some of like the good things too is like because you have like the 2 separate arenas, sometimes the ground might be all mucked up, but you might be able to just start smashing in space for an extra 2 damage each turn if it's uncontested and stuff like that. So I think he has like the ability to be able to do it when you're kind of ahead or behind, kind of, if the situation arises, is like somewhat powerful in that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It can create situations where you can get ahead or tie with your opponent, and that's value. There's value in those type of abilities that can get you there. All right, let's take a look at Count Dooku, Face of the Confederacy here. 7 cost leader unit, so you can deploy this as early as turn 6. It's a 5/9 with overwhelm. So this allows you to, when you attack into unit, anything that goes past their current damage goes directly to their base. And then on attack, another trigger here, the next Separatist card you play this phase gains exploit 3. So you can remove 3 units from your board or defeat 3 units from your board to put in a cost for up to 6 less. As a leader card, he has the action where he can exhaust himself and play a Separatist card from your hand, and it has exploit 1. There you see the definition of exploit. It'll cost 2 less. 5/9 unit. Dooku, I think you and I are probably going to agree on Dooku here. Dooku has a problem with the fact that this only works on Separatist cards. Already that's my first issue with it. Are there a lot of Separatist cards in the set? Sure, there are. Is he better in constructed? That's definitely where I'd put him. But automatically you're going into a box with him, and there are a lot of good stuff that you can make work. But in order to get like a value from him every turn, you're going to want to make sure you are only using Separatist cards and playing some cards that are going to give you some value, like what we've seen of Wat Tambor and Nute Gunray, of cards that when they die can do something for you there. So there's a little bit of setup here. You have to draft the right cards. So you want to be a little bit of expert of looking for something specific and which Separatist cards you actually need. I think for play, if you're going to do super well with it, you really want to have a lot of experience under your belt. So that's kind of where I see Dooku. It's like there's already some key things in here that pull me away from him. Now he has overwhelm, he has a good amount of health. So if I had just good green cards, sure I'd make it work, but they'd have to be good green cards in my opinion. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I pretty much agree with a lot of the stuff you were saying about his ability and then his on attack ability. Giving exploit to separatist units that already have exploit, a lot of them, doesn't necessarily get you ahead of a lot of the time, too, because it's not like saying, oh, your first exploit is free or something like that. If it had like something where it's like, you can exploit for one less or whatever, I don't even know how you would make it good. So a lot of the times when I see Dooku, I basically only see him as a unit and a leader, too, where he basically has ability on no ability on the other side outside of being like a 5/9 overwhelm. Um, have I seen people use his ability? Yes. Has it seen him get people ahead? Not a whole lot often, because unfortunately, if you are in kind of the or in the villainy thing, you are playing with 1/1s, and he of all the people is like the most obvious of like, I'm gonna do a big play if it's going to happen, and most of the time it's not going to happen. So he basically is like a color only leader for me, where it's like I'm playing him if that's I need to be villainy or I need to be green.
I'm
So
with you. That if I'm I think we both agree there. Like if it's just like it's green, I gotta make it work, I'll make it work. And there's some good plays. I mean, I like putting a big droid in on turn one, right? If I somehow got a battle droid token or one unit and I could put something in for a little bit less, great. Why not? But the the other side of that coin is well, this has exploit 3. I could give it exploit 4. Am I really going to get 4 battle droid tokens that are all 1/1s ready to go? You know, probably
yeah,
not. All right. Well, where would you put him? Where would you put Dooku for?
I had him right above Nute Gunray. So whether or not that was C tier or D tier is where I'm kind of putting him. But I had him
I
C.
Okay. Well, hey, I have him C as well. I could argue that there's some things that could bring him down to D, but I go with C just because they're as much as like I feel like I would only play him if I had green. I think there is some support in other cards to where he wouldn't necessarily need. Like if you really wanted to play Dooku, you could find it. Like you can make it
Yeah.
work.
And maybe
And
you get some of the good payoff cards that like, help you make it
yeah,
good. But I mean, the times that I've played Dooku, the exploits seemed irrelevant, and him just being a 5/9 has been the biggest problem.
yeah. But I wouldn't mind like exploiting the 5 cost or any unit with Sentinel if I can get it out early, right? Like just but even that 5 cost super battle droid and just
Hmm.
lower that, put that for 3 and it's a 5/4. Like I'll take it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Padme Amidala. Looking at our next screen leader here. Leader unit 5 cost. She's a 2/7. She comes out as early as turn 4. With Restore 1 when she attacks, healing damage only from your base, and Coordinate. Coordinate's one of the new abilities here that says you have to have 3 units in play for this to trigger or be available to you. Padme counts as one of those units herself. Her Coordinate ability says on attack, search the top 3 cards of your deck for a Republic card, reveal it, and draw it. All right. For Coordinate, when she is just a leader, it's the same thing, except the trigger has changed since she does not attack. You're going to spend 1 resource in action, and you're going to exhaust her, so you can only do it once, to search 3 cards of your deck for Republic, reveal it, draw it. Thoughts? What do you got for Padme here?
Padme is just overall kind of unexciting, unfortunately. Her body is not very good as a 5 mana 2/7. 2/7 is not I mean, 2/7 on a leader is not terrible if you can find any kind of upgrades to go on her. But, you know, upgrades tend to be setting yourself up for a 2-for-1 a lot of the times when you aren't able to put it on your leader. In terms of the kind of drawing a card, um, I still haven't found that card advantage is that good. in this game in terms of like drawing cards. Uh, Drawing 2 cards a turn really doesn't, and all your cards being kind of gas in that there are no resource cards in this game, um, really makes like the value of drawing a card less overall. That being said, I could see her being better in draft overall than she was in sealed, being able to kind of make a Republic deck, or make, I'll have a high number of Republic units will be good. And then, 1 mana to possibly draw a card. That might be what it's worth, what drawing a card is worth in this game. Granted, you need coordinate to do it, so I think she's kind of boring, but if you can find like a slow deck, she could be passable.
Yeah, I played with Padme in limited or in a draft, and I had a great game with her. But it was definitely like I'm just playing green white, small units, going. I'm not getting the Republic ability or her coordinate ability off at any point until she's in play, just because I'm not keeping 3 units in play. That's one every turn has to stay in play, which means I could do this on the turn she comes out for 1 resource, but I'm probably not going to spend 1 resource to do that.
Yeah.
I'm more than likely just going to deploy her and put out a good 5-drop unit on tempo. So immediately I kind of put her in a lower tier because, her deployability, like she's on the board, doesn't feel like a threat. Her other ability requires so much. I mean, it's so much of a stipulation. In order to really get value out of her, you're playing more Republic, which it's in every color, which is great, but you're still you may be passing on other cards, or be so focused on that it just I just don't think there's value. I think playing her, you even need to have some experience because you're wanting to make sure you know what cards you need to put out to stay alive to trigger coordinate correctly. Right? You don't need to put out. It's about putting out the right 2-drop, the right 3-drop, the right 4-drop if you really want coordinate to trigger and those units to stay. So, um, yeah, I'm not impressed with Padme in a limited format. You can have a great game with her, but I think too many things have to line up for this.
Yeah, and she basically has no ability on her leader side until late game.
Yeah,
So, because you're not spending any resources in turns one, or if you are spending any resources on turns 1 to 5 to kind of do that, and you're not kind of maintaining tempo, you are probably getting behind, unfortunately, at that point.
exactly. Yeah, you're right. There's no value in it, so I'm not really hitting this other button till I'm, doing the coordinating ability till I'm on the board, and I'm not paying 1 until like we're probably like she's
Like
dead, and I
turn
have like
7.
7. Yeah,
Yeah.
7. Yeah, exactly.
7, 8 resources where you're just like, oh, I can fit it in at this point and possibly draw a card.
So I started off with Padme at rank D. I think it takes some knowledge to play it. I think you could be a, not entry level into the game, but a couple drafts you could give her a try. But I think in order to draft her, you need to have a lot of knowledge. So for me, she dances around a D and an F. What about you?
Yeah, definitely near the bottom of D, probably ahead of Nalase.
Oh, ahead of Nalase. Okay.
Well, I just think like the difference between 2-7 and 1-7 is like enormous.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're completely right. As someone who plays Nalase constructed, the amount of times I do not swing with the 1-7 is probably too many, and because what's the point? So,
Yeah, you're basically wasting an action, or not wasting an action, but you're using an action to do very little. So
yeah, and I'm throwing away someone who could actually, give another unit that needs to die health, or give my base health from it. So,
yeah.
awesome. Well, let's jump into the next character. Captain Rex, the last of the command here. 5-cost leader. Just comes out as early as turn 4. It's a 2/6. Weird stat lines, this whole set. When deployed, he creates a clone trooper token, just 1, and each other friendly trooper gets +0, +1. So I get +1 health. Makes all your trooper tokens, whether droid or clone, a little bit better. He, as a leader ability, you pay 2, will exhaust him, and as an action, if a friendly unit attack this phase, create a clone trooper token. So again, you need 1 unit in play to not complete an attack, just attack in order to trigger this. Yeah. So I was trying to remember. Did I start off with Padme? No. Well, I'll have you give me your thoughts on Cat. Did
Yeah,
you start
so
Padme? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
looking at it from like a limited perspective, I'm seeing a lot of things that I see as like very powerful. Recurring token production has always been
Mhm.
like a very powerful ability in general in limited. So in Magic, if you get something that can make tokens, you were basically winning that game. It also comes with a added anthem effect that can hit units that are already on the board, which is nice. So there's also like a ton of troopers in general in all the colors, because there's also like the rocket droid trooper in red
That's a great one.
that triggers off troopers too. So you learn that there's a lot more troopers than you think there are. He comes in with like a pretty impressive stat line on turn 5. Granted, 2-3 of it is exhausted when it comes into play because of the clone trooper token. But having 4-9 worth of power, or 4-9 worth of stats on that turn, seems pretty strong and is definitely above curve compared to the other 5-drop leaders. That being said, like, the 2 cost on the make a clone trooper is a little bit prohibitive. Obviously, it'd be probably too strong if it was 1 to make a 2/2, considering like Nute Gunray has to jump through a million hoops to make 1/1/1.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
so I have not personally been able to play with Rex, but from a kind of limited uh, perspective and just kind of seeing other people play him, he seems like he's pretty strong overall.
Yeah, and I do want to say he's strong. Like I look at him and I'm like, why is this good? And there's some things you mentioned that I think do make it good. Again, any game token creation in a limited format is good. This does have another trigger. If it was just pay 2, there's more to that, but there's something here, and I wish he could create more on attack, and there's a reason why he doesn't. He can protect himself from things like merciless contest when he gets deployed, which is nice. And Rex is actually one of the few cards that actually beat me in a limited format, and I was surprised. But I know the reason why he was beating me, not just piloting skills, because that player was really good. Shout out to them. But it was also just the ability to keep a unit in play every turn, and I think that's values. Like as long as you can get 1 in play your first turn, you now have an option every turn from there to keep something going. And then it's just the knowledge of being like, is this 2 cost better than the 2 cost card I have in my hand? Right? That's really it. At another point, it's just you're getting the point of putting 2 units out. I think that's where Rex is good. You can get consistent tempo. You can keep pressure with him, and I think you just maybe need to be mindful about when you deploy and when you don't. But I think in most cases you're going to deploy on the turn that you have 5 resources. So yeah, I think he's solid. I think originally when I look at him on paper, I don't want to give him as high as grade, but when I really can sit down with him, I would be willing to say it sits in the C or B, because there's a lot of cards that work with him in the set, and you don't really need a lot of like synergy cards to really have a great game with him. You just need to have the ability to keep units on board, and everything else just kind of comes easy at that point.
Yeah, and I think he also does like a really good job of activating coordinate. Obviously, putting 2 units into play is like a really big boon for that. So like you can flip him and then have a big 5-cost coordinate unit available to you, whether that's like the Peralta Freighter, Plo Koon, or something like that, where it's just like, oh look, I have an instant coordinate available. So I think he's pretty solid overall, and I did have him in B tier pretty solidly.
All right, we got 10 more leaders to go. Put Rex at 5 at B here. Let's go through these other ones here. I know we've been chatting for a while. Luckily, this is, I'm sure plenty of people are listening to this while they're at work today. So I think the next of these will go pretty quick because of who they are. But Asajj. Asajj is one of the lower villain units here. 4 costs, so it comes out as early as turn 3. 3/4 stat line on attack. If you played an event this phase, this unit gets +1/+0 for the attack and deals combat damage before the defender. That last part of her card is amazing. Sounds great. We see that on things like Han from set 1, the unit Han. And as a leader, Asajj has a very similar ability, but not as good. As an action, she can exhaust herself, attack with a unit. If you played an event with the unit for this phase, give the unit +1/+0 for the attack. So one unit gets stronger every turn by 1. That 1 can make a difference. Really, I like Asajj when she gets on the board. My notes with her, though, it's just for her as a leader, there's a lot of support. Like anything can be played with Asajj. It's not color specific at this point. You just need to make sure you have events, which is annoying. But she really does need bombs. She is restrictive in that. If you want the value out of her, like you're going to want to play events, keep a good amount of units out there, and telegraph it. But overall, like I think in order to play Asajj, you need to have a just lost that note. You need to be able to like to get this trigger going. So she's really just going to have like one good turn, maybe 2 good turns of deployment here. I think you have to be at really expert level to play her in a limited format, know when to deploy, who to swing, who to give the event like the bonus to, and then even drafting. I think you'd rather be really knowledgeable in drafting. Not a leader I would say just immediately grab because you like yellow and you like Asajj as your character. I think you really want to be intentional with what you're doing here. What do you think?
Overall, I think like Asajj is like a real trap card in general. I mean, the fact that you have to play events to kind of get her ability to go off is not necessarily wannabe. The quality of the events that you get in limited are not going to be nearly as high quality as in constructed. So, I mean, I guess the one area where I see where she could be decent is if you probably pair her with red. That gives you events that can do direct damage, being able to deal direct damage and then give her kind of a first strike ability. I could see that as being a trade, but I'm not even sure that you ever want to flip her right away unless you have the support for it. Because at 4 toughness, she gets killed by everything.
Yeah.
She gets beat by like a lot of kind of 3 and 4 drops already, and then her only being able to attack for 4 doesn't get over like it seems like 5 is the real number on the ground that matters. 5 and 6, 5 being the first kind of break point, and then 6 being like the next kind of break point. So I don't know. Yeah, she's basically near the bottom for me because she's not really powerful on either side either.
You know,
And you
that's
have to
where I
build a
have her
bad
too.
deck. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Do we think she's F tier? I have her at D tier when I start looking at her. Then I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? You have to be really good when you're playing her, and you have to be really good when you're drafting her. So I'm definitely more leaning to like this is just not a card you should draft.
Yeah. I mean, luckily you're in the color that has the events that makes units. So you're in the colors that make both like on the doorstep and the droid deployment and the political pressure. So you have like more options overall. It just still feels like you're probably playing bad cards, which is not where you
Yeah.
want to be.
Yeah.
to possibly make her work. So I could see her being F. I was being a little more generous and putting her on D because I think I would play her if I had to, but I don't think I would ever actively draft a Asajj deck, like a high synergy Asajj deck.
Yeah. And that's where I think if you had to play her, you would draft the high synergy, right? Like I have to feel like I don't feel like you can just fall into this is what I have. I play Asajj now because it's just like no. What else do you have? I feel like
Like my biggest problem is like I can't think of a single card that I would draft first pick that would be like, oh, I'm gonna go Ventress because I drafted this first pick.
Yeah,
Like a good first pick card. Because sure you could draft like an on the doorstep or something like that and be like, yeah, I got a first synergy card, but it's like it's not necessarily what you want to be drafting first.
no.
So
Let's leave her at F. She's our first F. She can
okay.
stay there. So, I think worst case we could say she's a D. But again, I think just the argument of being like, if I had to, I'd want to know I have to go that direction and choose choose bad cards on purpose. So
Yeah. Maybe in Cube she'll have a life.
I think in Cube you can set that up much easier.
Yeah.
A Jango Fett, constructed, newest talk of the town here. Jango Fett, he's a 5-cost leader unit, so you can deploy as early as turn 4, 3/7, and when a friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit, you may exhaust that unit. This is great because as long as you are having friendly units hit multiple units in a one phase, you can exhaust a lot of other units. Now, as leader ability, Jango says when a friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit, you exhaust Jango. So this is reactive, meaning you can do it as soon as it happens. You exhaust the leader, and if you do, exhaust that enemy unit. So the trigger still, you need to have one unit in play to do this. And if you're not killing them, you are preventing them from hitting back. So you kind of want to have the initiative a lot of times to make Jango work. Yeah, what are your notes on Jango?
So overall, I felt like Django's been pretty well suited for the format, or pretty well positioned in general. He has some pretty high quality commons in his colors, mainly top priority being like the P-21 Starfighter, the one that pings the unit when it comes into play and leaves play.
Mhm.
The time that I did have him in sealed, that card did absolute work for me. The ability to basically turn all your kind of 1/1 separatist droids into attack and exhaust a unit when he's flipped is pretty solid. And even just like on the other side, being able to exhaust one unit can really make a difference in terms of trades. Um, that being said, uh, I don't know. I think he's pretty good overall. I don't think his power is very impressive though. So, like, he's not. Yeah, I don't even know how to say it. He's good, but he's not great.
Yeah.
But I think the colors he's in is pretty solid too. So for where we're at.
Yeah, and I think Django for all those same reasons. It's there's a lot of good cards that can work with him, specifically in yellow and red, because that's the most damage you can do on play or defeat abilities. So you have a lot more options there than any other. It is gives you a lot of outs, especially with strong leaders like Anakin, because as long as you can just throw out that starfighter, Anakin's exhausted, done. Like, it doesn't have to be combat damage, which I think is nice. So being able to exhaust units beforehand, but I think because of how his ability works, you really want to have a lot of games under your belt before you play a deck like this, and you want to have some drafts under your belt to kind of know what specific cards are going to be beneficial here for you to get value out of Django every turn, staying ahead or balancing out. Because he can definitely get you ahead and keep you ahead if you do something right. And I don't think you need like a lot of that too much setup to make it work, just because there are so many cards in there with defeat abilities. So yeah, I mean, if we jump into the ranking here, I'm definitely in between a B and an A when it comes to Django Unlimited. What about you?
I had him right at the top of B at
Hmm.
this point. I think like the 3/7 body is good. It comes out on turn 5. It's where you want to be, and I think he's been a pretty solid leader overall. And him being the common leader makes it helpful too. So you're not getting stuck with Asajj.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's look at this favorite yellow leader. It's only a leader, not a leader unit. Chancellor Palpatine and Darth Sidious. Chancellor Palpatine it says you start the game with this side face up. He has the action, you can exhaust him. And if a friendly heroic white aspect unit was defeated this phase, draw a card, heal 2 damage from your base, then flip the leader. Now, when Darth Sidious is flipped, his ability says as an action, if you played a villain black aspect card this phase, create a clone trooper token, deal 2 damage to each enemy base, then flip this leader. You get, so here we everyone, this was a talk of a town forever, and it still is. The ability to finally play villain cards and hero cards with penalty, but also without penalty is interesting. It's definitely a tempo-based deck, meaning you're going to want to be very specific on cards you're playing every turn. You want to be playing cards every turn. You're looking for synergy in the sense of, are you drafting the right amount of cards to get value out of Palpatine every turn? You can certainly not do that if you wanted to and just play like an early heroic game until you flip and stay villain. But chances of that really happening, not so much. I think as soon as I see Palpatine in this, it's just there are too many situations here. You're going to get stuck with a leader that cannot deploy, so you can't count on them to ever do damage for you. You're playing yellow, so you got to be really specific on the next color you pick, and that color better have some solid, or whatever you pick needs to have like a solid bomb, and you need multiple bombs. You need multiple closers, multiple units that are strong, that are difficult to deal with, have good health lines, hit hard. I just think there's so much here to make him work that, again, you need to be intentional. You need to know how to play a deck like this. So a lot of games under your belt to know what you're looking for. And you have to hope that you're drafting the right cards every time, because if you're sitting in between two other heroic players, you may not see these cards without taking like enough initiative, and you need to know which card you need to take every turn. So, it's immediately like there's just a lot of negativity I have with Palpatine. But maybe you have something different for me, Dave. What do you got?
I think he's just too hard to make work. So like you think about it, it's like, oh well, like if you're gonna play a leader that's both heroism and villainy, you're like, oh well, probably I want to play a lot of neutral cards, right? Just yellow cards or just whatever your secondary color is. Unfortunately, you start doing that is like then you basically completely blank your leader, and that because you need to be spending these kind of heroic and villainy cards in order to get him to get any ability to it. Now, you would think that, the Darth Sidious side of being able to make like a clone trooper token for free, we talked about, making units is good, making units for free is even better, but I think this is like too much to go through. Both of his abilities, both like the heal from your base and then do 2 damage to a base, generally are not relevant numbers, unfortunately. Like I mean,
Oh.
yeah, healing 2 from a base is better than doing 2 damage a lot of time, but like if it could do 2 damage to a unit, maybe we're thinking more playable overall. But I think just in general, it's too difficult. Also, when you're saying, oh, you got to draft like really like a curve, you can't really even draft a curve because you're never going to be certain what
Nope.
you're going to be on. So, like, I think I haven't tried it yet, but I imagine the piloting of this deck would be very difficult. And if you are able to make it work, I don't know how powerful it will be.
I'm with
Which
you.
is not you don't want to be difficult and not powerful. That's like not a place where you want.
Yeah.
That's not the intersection you want to be at.
I immediately just think you need, like, if I had to say what where I put them, it's definitely F, because I think you need to be an expert level at playing them. You need to know the timing of your cards is so important to get value every turn. And I think if you need to be timing and setting up to get value out of this leader consistently, you need to have games under your belt. I think drafting, you need to know exactly what to look for, what to avoid, and even then you're still going to struggle. And then again, neither of the abilities are great without strong cards in the color and a good amount of bombs. So for me, Palpatine sits at an F.
Yeah, bottom of the barrel, last
Bottom
place,
of it.
unfortunately.
Love it. Let's jump to you said something at the end of Palpatine I think is good. It's um a leader that's stronger but still has, I'm trying to remember exactly what you said, like it's complicated, a little
Oh yeah,
complicated to set up, or what was
it's like when you're looking at it, it's like if a leader is difficult to use, you want the payoff to be that it's
it?
strong.
Yeah.
So
And I
if
think,
the payoff is not strong, then what is the kind of purpose? Or
so here's one that I think is different, is a little complicated, but has some value, in my opinion. So Quinlan Vos, 5 cost, deploys when you have as early as turn 4, a 3/7. When you play a unit, you may deal 1 damage to an enemy unit that costs the same as or less than the played unit. All right, so I just have to play units. Like it. As a leader, when I play a unit, I exhaust him. So again, once per turn. If I do, I deal 1 damage to an enemy that costs the same as the played unit. So that's I really like Quinlan's ability. Play a lot of them in constructed right now. I don't like his leader ability because that's probably the hardest part. You're trying to match tempo every turn. And so when I look at someone like Quinlan, I see kind of what you're saying there. But go ahead and give me your notes. But automatically, I would say like I think he's a complicated character to play, but I think there's value here. What are your notes on Quinlan Vos?
Yeah, so my immediate impressions, like first thing I'm looking at is I see a repeatable kind of removal source. Being able to kind of do 1 damage over and over again is pretty strong in general. Some of like the strongest cards in Magic were Timmy's, which were like the units that did 1 damage to a base or a unit. So kind of translating that over, I thought that would be good. And Crosshairs and Set 2 prove that, having a repeatable source of removal can be very strong. That being said, I think he's a lot harder to kind of use than you would think. You would think like the ability is like, oh, like I'm able to do all these kind of trades, or always able to get this 1 damage. Where a lot of the times it feels like when he's not flipped, you're maybe doing 1 damage 50% of the time, if that. So, I don't think he's like oppressively strong. That being said, like he matches up well. Your opponent always has to probably be thinking about it. Whereas like if they're not thinking about it, you get like a free ping off, or they're not expecting it. Like it can be really strong. The one draft I did do with him, he was pretty good until I ran into Anakin, and then we had some trouble there. But overall, I think he's well positioned. The color that he's in is good. Like, I mean, his premium uncommon and white yellow is probably one of the strongest uncommons in Plo Koon. So, like, if you can kind of fit those two together, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, and I think Quinlan gives you a good like a good frame to work with. So I think when you're drafting with Quinlan, you're making sure like, am I drafting 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s? Like tempo is important, curve is important. So it does make you start thinking about that. And I think that's good for people who want to kind of up their drafting game and trying to challenge themselves and start thinking about drafting mechanics. Quinlan helps you do that in a very unique way because you know this a lot of times, like as a drafter you're trying to think of like how many cards have I drafted that are in this color, or maybe like are already like I have my 2 drops, I have my 3 drops, I have my 4 drops. Like you're these are things you're trying to keep track of, and Quinlan kind of forces you to think about that in the draft, because in an ideal world you're going second every time with Quinlan Vos playing. Your opponent plays your 2 drop, you play yours, deal 1 damage. They play a 3, you play your 3, deal 1 damage. They play their 4, you play your 4, deal 1 damage, right? And so on and so on and so on. I like that with Quinlan. I like at the end that there's still value when he's on the board. It's different type of value, but it's there, and you can be very situational with it. I like that, where you can say they have a 3 drop with 1 health left. Okay, I'll just play my 3 drop, and that's enough to kill it. I don't have to play my 4 drop if I don't want to right now. Maybe I have 7 resources. I'm saving that 4 drop for if he plays the 4, or my opponent plays a 4 drop, but. I like the stat line. I think they hit hard. There's some opportunities here, but I do think you need to be yeah, some level of play. Maybe not like an advanced level of play here with Quinlan, but it's not one to go in blind. I think he's a great challenge. I think you can get some wins in there. I definitely think out of all the yellow cards, besides Jango, it's definitely below Jango, but I am impressed with them, especially when I think of a lot of other hero yellow cards we've seen in this game in any format. So I really like Quinlan. But if I had to give Quinlan a home, it would probably sit in the C build for me with Count Dooku. What do you think?
I was slightly more generous and had him in A tier. overall
Oh
with
wow.
with my boy Obi-Wan and Wat, but
I started in an A/B tier with him. You kind of convinced me more of like maybe I'm praising him too high.
well, yeah, I think he does fine overall.
Mhm.
And I've been impressed with him. Like he's got good traits too. So
We'll go here. We'll go in between Watt and Obi-Wan. I think that sounds like where we would both agree. Um, if, yeah.
yeah,
So
somewhere
I
around
mean,
there.
I could argue that I'd put him in A because that's where he
Do you
stands
think
before.
Django is
But
more powerful than him overall?
I think Django requires less work when
Hmm.
drafting than him, and that's the big thing. I think with Django, you're being specific on cards, but you're not thinking too much about like, is my tempo right? But with Quinlan, I need to really think, do I have enough 3 drops? Because I don't want to not have a 3 drop my first turn, like or a 2 drop my first turn, a 3 drop my second turn, right? And I think that's where it changes it up, where it's just like, I don't want to have a turn where I don't do nothing. Is even more important now. And even so, like, I don't want to play like a resupply or even like, a vanquish. I'd rather have a unit that may kill another unit right now. Um, and I know that's weird to say vanquish. I'd grab vanquish every time over a 5 cost unit. But if I saw Plo Koon and vanquish, that's a whole different game. I guess still vanquish, but
I don't know. I might take Plo Koon because ambush is basically removal in
you're
terms of
right.
the
I just
innate.
don't know if I'll have the six
Yeah,
hitting Plo Koon. And that's
three
really
hitting
what I
Plo Koon
want.
is not terrible either. I don't know. He was as said, like I came into having a very pessimistic a view of coordinate being a thing in this format, and I've
Mm-hmm.
been kind of more pleasantly surprised that like coordinate is much easier to kind of get activated than I was expecting. So
Let's put him right now there next to Django, just as good.
yeah,
Let's move on. Our final yellow unit, General Grievous. Now, Grievous is a card you can only get if you get the not hyperspace showcase version of them in your set, which you have seen in set 2 if someone pull one of the starters in their draft. Uh, Grievous is a 6-drop leader, which means he can come out as early as turn 5. They're a 4/8 separatist official, and on attack, he may give a droid unit +1/+0 and Sentinel for the phase. General Grievous's leader ability is as an action you can exhaust them to give a droid unit Sentinel for the phase. They do not get the bonus of the +1/+0. Um, we chatted a little bit about this, about how I didn't spend a whole lot of time on these units, but Grievous is definitely one of, I see this unit and there just isn't a lot of value here. Like it's a 4/8 that comes out on 5. It hits okay. It can take 2 swings, but when are you intimidated by Grievous on the board? He's giving something Sentinel that maybe hits you harder, but if you're not, but that means he has to have units in play. They have to be droids. There are droids in here, but also they're not. So
there's
it's
also a lot
it's
of clones. So yeah,
yeah, exactly. There's a lot
There's a lot of-
there, and you're making a conscious decision to play General Grievous. If you have a lot of yellow black, you're trying to do that. You can go into Grievous because you have all the colors for it and still not have a lot of droids to get that Sentinel ability. So that's, for me, it's like the ability doesn't matter with Grievous at all.
yeah. Well, I thought going into like the pre-release that like I would see more of him, but it seems like in general like he was just kind of underperforming in his slot. Like one just kind of giving a droid sentinel. I thought it would be better because there aren't a whole like that's the only way you're gonna get roadblocks up in this kind of format. It seems like,
Mm-hmm.
and it just never seemed to be very good. Or maybe my opponents weren't very good at using it. But one thing I'll say is like 4/8 on turn 6 is okay. Like that's a lot of toughness, but 4 power is you know I don't know. You're dealing with like the likes of Maul and Anakin on turn 6, who have anywhere from 6 to 7 power a lot of the time. So um, I don't know if I open up a showcase Grievous, maybe I'll try and run it, but I think he's kind of lower priority, even if you do open up the showcase.
All right. Well, where would you put him on here? You get the showcase of Grievous, and the intent is, do you play it?
Yeah, probably D tier. I think probably better than Asajj in that like you can just
I'd put it
play him
better
as
than
a full.
Asajj.
Yeah, but not not significantly better. You're
All
not very
right.
excited about it. Yeah.
Let's agree with that. That is, yeah, that's exactly what I would do. If I had to pick between these three villain leaders, even though Palpatine's not villain, but is, it would definitely be Grievous out of those three on top. Not a high top there either.
Yeah. It's a very low bar to cross.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mace Windu, Vapod Form Master. Leader unit, 7 cost, means she deploys as early as turn 6. 5/8, love the stat line, Force Jedi Republic. When deployed, do 2 damage to each damaged enemy unit. I don't mind it. I wish it wasn't damaged enemy unit, but I'm also, I mean, I would add at 6 resources, I'm okay having a 5/8 on board without it hitting anything. As a leader unit, Mace says as an action, spend 1, exhaust him, deal 1 damage to a damaged enemy unit. Then if it has 5 or more damage on it, deal an additional damage to it. So you have a possibility of like, finishing off some units here, executing them. That is funny when I think about Mace Windu now in the scene. Dave, what are your thoughts here?
All right. So apparently I didn't read Mace Windu very well the first time because I just realized it has to do damage to damaged enemy units. So that is a little bit of a restriction, you know, following under like the same idea that repeatable removal, it should be pretty good, pretty solid in general. Uh, I feel like Mace should be pretty good overall. The problem tends to be that he's very telegraphed. Like all his abilities are telegraphed, like both his kind of action and then when his flip, you can do stuff to mitigate the effectiveness of it, it seems like. Or at least if you play a certain way, you can mitigate the effectiveness of it. Now, one of the games that I used to play was like Hearthstone Arena, and in that you always had to kind of be aware of when your opponent's board wipes are. So, like, depending on what class you're playing against, you have to know, oh, how much damage they can do on that turn. Well, with Mace, there's not a whole lot of surprise with it. You know that when he's flipping, he's killing all damaged units. So, if you do a good job trading, or you might not make the best trades, but you'll make the trades that leave you with the most units when he flips. Can be a pretty kind of strong thing. I think the main issue is him being the rare leader. You're not going to see a lot of him to play, and I think he should be good overall, but I just think the late deploy is going to be the biggest issue.
Yeah, I think because of the late deploy, it's forcing you to play slower or play a slower game than normal. You have the option of damaging things, which may put your opponent on tilt or may have them hesitate a little bit on about what they're going to swing into, knowing that if they're left with 1 point of damage, it can take it out. Makes them reconsider some of their sentinel units a little bit as far as how much time is that really going to buy them with someone like Mace on the board, or if they're too big, right? How much does that hurt them? Um, but I do think because of how Mace plays and to get a lot of value out of him, it lowers him as a card because you're keeping one resource open a lot of times if you're trying to play defensively, which you may with him. You're you don't want to get stuck on the deployed ability because you may not be able to hit anything, but it's beneficial to have a 5/8 out there. So for me, it really pushes Mace down the line. I think you want to have some experience under your belt before you play a Mace Windu deck. And I think for drafting him, you could draft him pretty easily, but there's just because there's a lot of cards within the colors that do the damage, but you still want to know what kind of cards or what colors to really avoid with him. So for me, he's a very low tier rank unit leader, just because you want to really make sure you know what you're doing. Like, it's not that you need all the right cards to make it work. It's just you really want to make sure you know how to when to play those cards and making the best decision every turn with him. Ultimately, and a lot of times, like his ability, you're not going to use because you're just going to want to put another unit in on the board using a full amount of resources you have.
Yeah, you run into the issue of where it's like you kind of have to play off curve with him if you want to use his ability. And if then, like, how much are you losing out in terms of like board presence and stats because you're doing that? Because you're playing something that's significantly smaller, or not significantly smaller, but might not even be able to trade with the unit that your opponent played. So
Now, in the context of this list, I would say when I originally looked at Mace, I was putting him down pretty low. When I look at this list again and where we're at, he's probably a high D or a C tier unit. In fact, I'd probably even put him maybe before Dooku.
yeah, so I had him firmly in C as like the king of C tier above
Yeah.
Dooku and Nute Gunray, basically.
Let's go for
Whereas,
that.
like,
King of C
yeah,
tier, yeah.
because I'd probably definitely be more excited to play Mace Windu than Dooku, just in terms of like power level of the card. Like, because in a vacuum, Mace Windu seems like a powerful card. It should be a powerful card, right? Being able to do 2 damage to multiple units, being able to kind of finish off, big units easily, or kind of mid-sized units. That should be kind of a powerful thing. I just think he's just not very well positioned in terms of like the turn he comes down. Like,
No.
you're gonna have to really have a really strong early game in order to make it there. And that's not impossible to do, but it's something that you have to think about, where it's like a lot of the leaders that are slow, you really have to think about like having a slow controlling game plan. And that just doesn't seem where limited is heading, at least in this game, where it seems like it's a lot of tempo based. A lot of times you can't really stabilize unless you have a ton of sentinels, and even then, you're not even necessarily going to get that.
Yeah. All right, King of C tier. Let's move on to this guy who would wish he were to be king of the Mandalorians here. Pray Vizsla. 5 cost leader unit. Comes out as early as turn 4. 4/6. I don't mind 4/6. While you have 3 or more cards in your hand, this unit gains Saboteur. It's like coordinate before your hand. And while you have 6 or more cards in your hand, this unit gets +2/+0. So you could have a 6/6 Saboteur on the board as early as turn 4. As a leader, the ability says you can spend an action, spend 1 resource, and exhaust him to deal damage to a unit equal to the number of cards you have drawn this phase. Reminder text, this doesn't include cards drawn in the regroup phase.
Yeah, because that was the previous turn.
Yep. So this means you need to play a card that allows you to draw. You need to trigger or play a card to draw something here. And that's rough, in my opinion. Stat wise, it's like I think Brave Vizsla's fine. I just don't think he's bringing more to the table than it would a good uncommon or rare. I think he is neither of the abilities are that good. They're situational. They require a lot to trigger, and I feel like in a limited format, that's working against you. I'd rather have units on the board. I would have had probably a lot of cards already on the board by the time Prey Vizsla is deployable, so I'm probably not going to hit the 6 or more ability. And Saboteur is good. You and I have talked about that already before this, but there are not that many cards with Sentinel in this set. Not as many as we've seen in other sets, and there's very few cards to give Sentinel within this set. So for me, he doesn't come across as a card or as a leader I want to play that does something when he hits the board. I don't think he's that much of a threat. I think for piloting skills, you want to be really much better at this game to know when to deploy him and when to play draw cards rather than unit cards. And I think at drafting, you're playing that game as well of what cards are going to give me allow me to put more cards in my hand to get value out of Prey Vizsla when he's on that board. So for me, he's a rough card here. Dave, what are some of your notes for Prey Vizsla?
Yeah, so basically, when I'm looking at Priest Vizsla, I basically see a vanilla 4/6 unit. And by vanilla, I mean he basically has almost no text on him. His leader side ability of having to draw cards during your main phase, or during like the action phase, is really difficult to get done. And even then, like, the cost of drawing cards in this game is so expensive. In general, it's like, oh, to draw 3 cards, you have to pay 5 resources, unless you're willing to jump through a bunch of hoops by having like the draw 3 cards if you have 3 officials in play.
Mm-hmm.
And even
Or
that's
to
not in the
draw
right.
2 if you have, you can draw 2 with with the
Yeah,
private
manufacturer
manufacturing, but
soldiers.
yeah.
But so like, I mean, you're thinking about it as like, would you spend how much resources would you spend to kind of do 1 damage or 2 damage? So I think like in terms of that, it's basically a non situation. You're gonna probably have Saboteur maybe half the time because of the way like if you're curving out by the time your turn like 5 or 6, you have 1 or 2 cards in your hand a lot of the time, or 2 cards. So like before you play a unit, he'll have Saboteur, and then maybe after you play it, he won't on that turn. Um, yeah, if it was my only villainy leader, I think this is like the only time I would end up in pre Vizsla as a deck. And even then, I don't know if I would ever try for any synergy at this point.
Because like your best turn really is like, what if you play you keep all cards in your hand, right? Turn one, someone plays a unit. Well, guess what? I can pay one and I can kill it. Yeah, you probably could. You don't have a unit on board, but you killed theirs. Turn two, you do the same thing. Turn three, you do the same thing. You still have nothing on board, and then you put Prey Vizsla out. You could do all those things and have like a good turn. But if you couldn't kill any of those units, then what was the point?
You're gonna have a bad day.
Yeah, or again, it's like it's just there's a lot there. Like it can go bad as quickly as it can go well for you. Like that's the way I see it. Well, where would we put Prey Vizsla here? I don't think he's an F tier. I think when I look at him, I want to say F.
Yeah.
Probably for a lot of reasons, but
That was my initial impression, was like, oh, this guy's terrible. But like, at least he doesn't come out on 6. He comes out on 5. So like you're in a little bit better position overall. I just don't think he's very powerful. So I definitely had him near the bottom of D tier. Though whether or not he's better than like Nala say is arguable. I mean, they both suffer from the same thing. It was like they don't have any text on them, basically.
I'm definitely. I feel like there are times you can make Prey Vizsla work more than Nala say. But I definitely throw him in middle of D. I'm okay with middle of D. I would say the argument is low C, but I think even then that doesn't sound right.
I don't think
it comes out of my mouth and I'm like high D, maybe high D, but even I think D, middle of D seems good. All right, 3 red units left. Leaders left. Let's look at them all. 6 cost leader unit deploys with 5 or more as early as turn 5. 6/6, perfect. Overwhelm. Each friendly unit gains overwhelm. Overwhelm is the ability that says when attacking an enemy unit, deal XX damage to the opponent's base. So if your opponent's already damaged, units damaged, whatever carries over is great. If they have low health, even better. Love it. That's a static ability, meaning this is always online when he's on the board. When he's a leader, you can use an ability or an action, to exhaust him, give overwhelm to a unit, and have him attack immediately. Dave, what do you got? What do you got for the Dark Lord of the Sith over here? My favorite Dark Lord of the Sith.
Yeah, overall, I think Maul is probably like the strongest ability leader you can be in this kind of limited format. That being said, I will say his biggest downfalls is he seems like he doesn't match up very well stats wise into leaders of the same cost or even units of the same cost, unfortunately, which is like an awkward place to be. He doesn't trade with like either of the 6 cost leaders, which is incredibly problematic.
It's thematic. I love it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I guess so. Thematic, but it just feels kind of bad. That being said, I think he's probably one of the better kind of aggressive leaders. He turns any kind of your big units into direct damage while still being able to trade. He does have like probably one of the stronger finishers in his colors with Savage Opress kind of topping out the curve. That's been one of the cards that I've lost to the most in this format so far. Just taking 14 off the top on like 2 turns. It's real bad. That being said, like he's fair. And necessarily being fair doesn't necessarily mean that you end up very high up on the power rankings.
No, cards like this, In my opinion, yeah, with static abilities are just like that. They're fair cards, they're good cards, they're cards you're tempted to play with, and they're great, especially when you're like entry level into limited formats. These are good ones for you to kind of, not just figure out the game, but also enjoy the game. I think Maul gives you a lot of enjoyable moments without having to invest too much in like, did I get the right card type vibe.
Yeah, and I definitely think like he makes you want to be like a more aggressive deck overall. Like just being able to kind of get the damage in early and often puts you kind of in a different position. So I could see him being like pretty powerful in kind of yellow decks that have like the reach with, breaking in, or even a card I haven't seen played yet, but I feel like Grim Resolve has to be good. Or it has to be able to kill some people at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, and you have the green common that gives like +4 to something.
yeah.
So there's some potential here. I made some notes when I was looking at Maul, and a couple of the other leaders here, especially the next one. But with Maul, there are 25 cards that have power 4 or greater. And I think that matters because there is 36 cards with 3 or less health. So, and this is just like commons and uncommons. So, like the value of cards that you can at least get damage on that base, I think is pretty consistent with commons and uncommons. You should be able to find them. And there's more with just 3 health or less, then you should, like, your opponents are probably going to play them. And I like seeing some of those stats when it's just like, well, if this unit had overwhelm, I'm hitting the base this turn, and I like stuff like that. So for me with Maul, again, I think he's fun to play. You don't need necessarily cards like only in his colors. There's value there, but it's really just looking at one thing of like, do they hit hard? And I think that's really all you need to do. It's a great card to kind of set you up for intentional drafting and getting better at that. But, for me, I think Maul sits in this like B-A field for me. I don't think he's an S tier. I would say there's an argument that he could be in the low end of the A's, only just because I think he's easily accessible, can hit the board. You can have some good games without having to put too much like setup into it. But I could see the argument of like why he could live on a B. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like also the cards in his aspect are also strong with what he wants to be doing. Whereas like he has just natural synergy with like the cards that are red black, which is, a good place to be. Whereas you're looking at other things, it's like, oh well, I kind of have to make red black pre Vizsla do something to make it
Yeah.
happen. So personally, I had him like right after Wat in terms of like the power level. That being said, I think he's less strong than Obi-Wan. So, and I
Well, he
had like a
definitely can't
higher,
kill Obi-Wan.
yeah, and that was a very disappointing situation when it happened in sealed.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I've been on the other side of that, and that's where I'm like, I'm not scared of Maul because there are things like that. I'm just like, oh, he comes out, I come out. The end. He's dead. All right, well, let's leave him in that B, that middle of B there. Let's move on to the boy here, Anakin Skywalker. So, the chosen one. That's what it should say.
Yeah.
6 cost, deploys as early as turn 5, 4/7, great stat line, overwhelm, similar to Maul. This unit gets +1/+0 for every 5 points of damage on your base. So this means, for the most part, like, I played Anakin, and we'll talk about that more, but I made sure like every time he swung, he had +3. As an action, he can exhaust himself, deal 2 damage to his own base to attack with a unit, and if that unit is attacking another unit, it gets +2/+0 for the attack. So we have the ability to do damage to units that are in play. Gives you your own removal. You can take a unit that's like hitting for 3, it now hits for 5, and can take out a unit that has 5 or less health on the board. I think Anakin is solid. I went 9-2 in sealed with him. I think in limited, you don't need to be necessarily looking at all the right, like, it's not about the right colors with him. It's just looking at like, does this card either hit hard or have a good amount of health? And we've already talked about like how many cards hit hard. Like there's 25 of them with power 4 or greater. There are 36 cards that are commons and uncommons, which are stats I'm looking at, that have less than 3 health. So giving anything like overwhelm is good. Anakin hitting those is good. Anakin's unit should be able to clear stuff is good. Not only that, there are 17 units that have like an attack and health difference of 2 so that their health is stronger. And I think with someone like Anakin, you're using your units to trade, not even trade, just to eliminate other units, that having that extra health is going to be beneficial for you getting 2 to 3 kills out of a unit in play with Anakin's ability. So I definitely really liked Anakin in limited. I haven't had to draft with him, but I know like I'm not concerned about it. Like again, I've won enough sealed events with him. I'm 9-2 over a whole weekend with him. I think he's the strongest thing in this set. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's very close. I think Anakin is borderline impressive, at least in a limited format. Um, the main issue comes with like creature combat or unit combat is the main source of like removal in this kind of format. Anakin at any point in time basically allows you to trade up. And by trading up, it means like, oh, well, I can trade my 2-drop for your 3-drop, or maybe sometimes even your 5-drop. Like uh, units with 5 toughness or 5 health in this format do not last very long if you're playing against Anakin because their 2-drop can probably kill your 5-drop. So it's a very hard game to kind of play against Anakin. You want to be on the initiative if possible and be able to have kind of board control, be able to kind of dictate when trades are happening. That being said, if you do kind of amass a big board, eventually they're going to get the initiative back because you're just kind of dealing with your extra actions. Um, he also kind of creates this weird kind of push and pull where it's like, oh, well, maybe the idea is like you want to do as much damage as you can to Anakin early. So that way, like, he's not able to use his ability as much, or like his ability is more kind of reckless and stuff like that. The problem comes like if you try racing him and you don't set yourself up in a good position, it is very bad for you. You can start taking loads of damage, start losing lots of units like to bad trades, and it's just kind of been a weird situation. Also, like the Anakin mirrors are incredibly awkward because it comes down to like who's kind of playing a unit first a lot of the time in that, where it's like you want to be the person who's playing the unit last, so that way they're not trading into it. So it's just been kind of an interesting pull with them. He definitely feels a little overtuned, him being basically the strongest unit at 7 in terms of power for a leader is hard to deal with. And if you don't have a good answer for him on the flip turn, you are going to be in a load of trouble. And
Yeah.
even by answer, I mean like if you don't have a plan for the flip turn.
Yeah. Yeah, and he doesn't need many turns. Like it's usually once he was out, it was like the game's over next turn, if not the turn he's out. Like if when people were playing the race game, it's just like it's like I said, like you're gonna lose. I'm gonna get out, and I have 3 extra points of damage. I'm gonna hit you for 7, or I'm gonna like kill something that's on the board that was your only threat and still damage your base, and you may not have the answer to deal with Anakin past that. No, so I think for you and I, it's really, do we think he's S tier or just A tier?
I honestly think he has to be S tier. You don't really need to do much in terms of the
Mhm.
drafting process. Every unit you draft becomes a removal spell for your deck, basically. That means you can prioritize, less powerful units. You can even wheel units that other people aren't taking. Any 1/4 in your deck becomes a 2-for-1, it seems like. You saying that, was it 36 units? 36 common units have 3 health or less. Any 1/4 becomes Gene. The 1/5 draw card in Cunning is doing a lot of work for Anakin, and he just seems like if you are ahead, it's hard to get behind
Yeah. And
unless
when
you
we look
gas
at
out.
this, like this gap feels real because I think it is. I think this gap is real with this leader. Like he's not Boba leader, like set 1 Boba leader above them, like as far as like that great of a power level, but it is the idea of like you, there's it's not like Anakin is like you drafted Anakin, you're going to win. Like, but it is of like you drafted Anakin, it doesn't take as much work as some of these other ones to have a great deck. And I think that's the key with him. because
Yeah,
you
and I
already hit
think
your
also
bomb
like
as Anakin.
yeah, and then like the flexibility too. It's like you can be Anakin yellow, Anakin blue,
Yeah.
Anakin green, and it doesn't seem like any of those are a bad option at this point.
No, you can
So
get support out of all the colors, no problem. And he doesn't need certain keywords to make him better. Like they're great, but it's not necessary.
yeah, overwhelm makes him good, but doesn't isn't like a necessary thing. And so I think he kind of stands above all of them right now.
Yeah.
And my draft experience has basically shown that. I think the Anakin decks that I've drafted against have all, I don't say gone undefeated kind of thing, but they're always ended up at like the top of the pods and top of the drafts. It seems like so.
All right, final one right here.
Yeah, or a little bonus one.
Let's check her out. Of course, it's going to be Ahsoka Tano snips right out of the starter deck. So if you get this showcase Ahsoka Tano, it's a 5-cost unit. So you can deploy this as early as turn 4, 3/6 with coordinate. Coordinate says you gain the ability while you control 3 or more units. The specific ability you're getting here is Ahsoka goes up to a +2/+0. So you can have a 5/6 as early as turn 4. And when she is just a leader, she still has the coordinate ability where you can attack with a unit and gets +1/+0. So a little bit stronger there. Dave, what are your thoughts?
So I ended up playing Ahsoka at least in one of the or one of the pre-release pools. I was not fortunate enough to get Anakin in that pool, so I wanted to play kind of red white heroism. I think I had the most units in that. Overall, she's felt like a pretty good card. The 5/6 body on turn 5 or on the 5 resource turn can be really powerful if you can, reliably have coordinate activated. Having the 6 tough or 6 health is also like the right number for there. It seems like there's a lot of 5 power units, at least a lot of 5 power and 5 toughness Sentinel units. It seems like in this format or at least in this kind of thing. So she did pretty well for me. The kind of the flip side of the leader, you're not going to activate it a whole ton, but being able to get +1 attack lets you trade up. Obviously, not as good as Anakin, but it has some uses there. Also, the ability to kind of just go face with it. You don't necessarily have to be trading into a unit. Might be relevant. Like it helps you get in a couple extra damage over the course of the game, possibly. So I think she's decent. You know, I would probably play her in red white, but she's not going to be available in general.
Yeah. So like if you get her, obviously it's like, yeah, like I'd play it, right? We talked about if you open Grievous, it's like maybe I should. But if I open Ahsoka, I'm like, I can make this work. I can make Ahsoka work. I'm not limited in the color space. I can play whatever I want as long as I'm putting out units. It's just about tempo here. So good tempo. She deploys well. Especially if I'm playing my tempo game right. Even if I'm a little bit delayed, I'm okay having a 5/6 if it meant waiting another turn. Like I'm still okay with it. It's not the best, obviously, if they're deploying a Obi-Wan on that turn, but I may have a better course of action going ahead or have something else I can do. And even if I have their coordinator ability for that +1, it may clear the road for Ahsoka to stay on board longer when she is out. So I think she's playable. You don't have to draft a whole lot of specific things with her. You don't have to build a certain type of color of deck. Her abilities are pretty good with few limitations in this type of set. So for me, when we talk about tiers, it's really easy for me to say she's probably going to sit anywhere in these top 2 because there's not much limitation here outside of you know like, yeah, like she's not going to kill another 5-drop leader for the most part, but she's still a threat on the board.
Yeah, and it's still a lot of damage to be taking off when you're shearing off like a sixth of their health with like a single attack. Like 2 hits from that, and you can pretty much end the game a lot of the time. So I think she's pretty well positioned, though. Maybe because of like the rarity thing, I have her at like the end of B where she's that there. So probably a little bit stronger than Mace, but never gonna happen.
Yeah, it's when you look at especially when you look at these other 5s, right? Maybe this is why even what Quinlan would go down. But when you look at these other 5s, it's like she's not killing any of them.
No.
Like it's not killing a single one. And one of them makes her swing into it. So as a 6. So I don't know, stuff like that. But overall, like, so we have one S tier, no A tier, several Bs, Cs, Ds, and Fs. Is there any unit in the B tier that you think should move up? I don't know if I think any other tier should change, but we went heavy B tier.
Yeah.
Overall, after this hour and a half long discussion, 2 hour long discussion. So,
Yeah, we've been busy.
I know, right? This is now the podcast for people who stuck with us this long. But would we have changed any of these Bs after discussing everything we did? Any of them that you think that should be an A?
I don't know. I mean, like the two that I think about, at least the ones that I've felt have been like Quinlan and Obi have been like the two strongest out of that tier for me overall.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the ability to have like kind of repeatable removal, falls under a pretty strong kind of thing. That being said, like I have only one kind of event with each of them so far. And maybe my Obi-Wan hate is based off of a kind of results based opinions where it's like, oh, lost to Obi-Wan again. So
I think if that's the case, maybe let's look at it like that and change the B ranking a little order here. Because I can see it, my opinion with it is with Obi-Wan and Quinlan, although both are good, they get a lot of support in their colors. I don't necessarily think they need to have a certain closer. I think they can do like their tempo's good, but do you think they both get support in other colors outside of the ones they're in? That's probably my only argument of why I can't, like, I struggle putting them in A, is because I think you really want to lean heavier in blue and yellow more than
yeah.
anything else.
Well,
Like
I
I
could
feel,
definitely see Quinlan being good with like kind of a red shell, or not even a red shell, but like a red kind of support. You have access to more ways to do additional damage, which means like your one damage might be more relevant. Like having access to daring raids and stuff like that to finish off units, or that I could see him being that, but I think he's just like well positioned. It seems like heroism in general, the cards in heroism is better in the set
yeah,
overall,
I'd agree.
and which is unfortunate when like the best leader is also heroism.
Yeah, I think that's something we see on here. Like, despite like what everyone's opinions are going to be about a list like this, I think it's very obvious of like some of the better cards are hero cards in this set to so many of the other ones. I mean, we look at this list and like so much work goes into so little value.
Yeah,
Right
and like
there.
what's the payoff?
Yeah.
We talk about it's like, is it difficult for a good payoff, or is it like difficult for a mediocre payoff?
Yeah.
So
All right. So this is our list. Anakin in S tier. A tier is nothing. Borderline Obi-Wan and Quinlan could be A tier. We have Jango, Wat Tambor, Maul, Yoda, Captain Rex, Ahsoka Tano in our Bs. Our C started with the King of C tier, Mace Windu and Count Dooku. Our D ends up being a bunch of leaders, essentially. Well, I guess they're all leaders. Nute Gunray, Padme, Vizsla, Nalase, General Grievous, and our F tier ones that just don't do it or be very, very intentional of what you're trying to do here. And it's Asajj and Chancellor Palpatine. That is our list. Dave, this has been a very quick, honestly, and fun 2 hours. I know neither of us planned on this going 2 hours tonight, but I think this was super fun. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your expertise, giving some of your time, and just having this discussion that we would normally have like at one of the local events. I know I enjoyed it. I enjoyed putting the research in more into this, and you came right from a draft, so I know you're fresh on that knowledge. And I know here in the Portland area, we have drafts happening all the time. And you mentioned earlier how like you went to the first Guardian Games draft, one of the bigger stores in the area, and that was the first draft with set one, and they had how many people? 40? More than
uh
40.
I think they had almost 60 on that like first
Yeah,
one. It
yeah.
was like the whole place was filled. It was
It was
crazy.
it was so full. I remember thinking like that's a 10 o'clock, or that was on a Thursday night. I'm like, I'm glad I
Yeah.
didn't go when I heard there were 60 people and the amount of pots that had to be ran. Um, But I mean, that's the limited format here, and people love limited. So I think this was great, sitting down, having this long discussion, sharing our thoughts and opinions. Again, I appreciate you doing that. Is there anything else you want to close off before we sign off here?
No, I wanted to say thank you for being such a great host, D-Rod. You are awesome. I've enjoyed spending our time together going over this tier list, and we definitely love to hear in the comments about what you guys think as viewers in terms of your experience in Limited too. So, thank you guys for the opportunity, and I hope to be back for set 4 when we're
Yeah.
jumping to Lightspeed. Right?
Yeah, that's the plan. That's let's definitely do that. We definitely have the setup and the format ready to go. And again, as Dave said, if you have comments, and like, I would love to know what things you look at when you're ranking your own leaders, if you rank them yourself. We gave you a little bit of those things. As a reminder, I look at like their abilities on when they're deployed, when they're not. I'm looking at how easy they are to play for players, and how much knowledge and skill do I need when I'm drafting. We've talked about a lot of stuff, give people a lot to think about, but good luck at your next limited draft event. There's going to be plenty happening, especially going to be at the Worlds event. Dave, are you thinking about going to Worlds?
I'm definitely thinking about it. I got to start looking at my schedule for next year and start requesting time off. There's definitely a couple of trips I want to do next year, but I am signed up for a planetary qualifier in January that we're going to have to test for at some point.
Yes,
Or
yes, we
maybe
can do
not.
that. We can do some constructed testing so you can get more than 2 games before you attend an event. And yeah, no, I think World's going to be great. A lot of side of events, and by that time we'll have at least 2 more sets reviewed and limited, and we may do some more limited talk. Dave and I. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for listening for these 2 hours. If you threw this on while you were working, as I know many of you had, this was one of our longest videos we've done, but I'm certainly proud of it to record these kind of conversations. Dave, thanks again. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great week. Good luck at your future events, and may the force be with you.